All right, audio on. Jake Sweet in the room. So, what we're going to talk about today is one of the first novice videos. So, if you're a novice, the new evidence that you get a hold of, new argument you get a hold of is the disadvantage. So, what we want to talk about first is generally what's the story of a disadvantage. So, I'm not going to talk about the specific evidence this year. I'm just going to talk about generally when you're talking about a disadvantage, what's the story of it, right? How does it progress? How does it relate to the affirmative, stuff like that? So, in general, a disadvantage is an unforeseen outcome of the plan. So, in the 1AC, the affirmative stands up and they say, hey, judge, if you pass our plan, all these good things are going to happen. As the negative in the 1NC, you can stand up and say, actually, they said all these things are going to happen. They're not really going to happen, or maybe they're already happening, so you don't need to do the plan, or maybe they're not even that good. So if you do it, you don't really get that much out of it. Those are all answers to the plan, right? So as the negative, now you have the option to, instead of directly answering the plan, you can say, okay, you do the plan, whatever, but this unforeseen consequence will happen if you pass this plan. And this happens all the time in real life, right? You might think you have a really good idea, but then when you actually do it, there's something that happens as a result of it that you didn't foresee or you didn't predict would happen, right? So that's what a disad is. It says, okay, the affirmative covered some things, but they didn't cover this one thing that I think is going to happen if you pass the plan. It's going to be a bad thing. So this is a new argument if you're the negative that you should introduce in the 1NC. So a disadvantage is an unforeseen outcome of the plan. So the 1AC talks about what will happen in the plan. If you answer those points about the 1AC says, that's an on-case argument, right? They're trying to pass their case. If you answer their case, it's an on-case argument, pretty simple. The disadvantage is an off-case argument because the answers you're making are not directly related to the case. They're only related to what would happen if we pass the plan. So it's related to the case in the sense that if the plan passes, the disad will happen, but it's not necessarily disagreeing with anything that they said on the actual case itself. So a disadvantage, also called a disad sometimes, is an unforeseen outcome of the plan. So basically what you're saying is whatever the 1AC says, that's great, but in some other part of the world that the affirmative doesn't talk about, there will be some effect of passing the plan. So for example, in this year's topic, we're talking about taking away guns from the majority of police officers, right? So we could say, for example, the 1AC doesn't talk about this, but that would hurt the economy, right? There's a bunch of people who are employed to make firearms, to do firearm training, et cetera, and they would be out of a job if we passed this plan, right? Or we talk about the environment, we talk about human rights, talk about how it affects other countries, stuff like that. So in other years, there's going to be different disadvantages that are related to different plans, and they're going to change every year. But basically what you just want to know is that except for the relation to the plan passing, it's a separate story from the 1AC's story. So the 1AC tells their story, and you say, okay, yeah, that's your story, but here's our story. If you pass the plan, it's going to cause this other thing to happen. Totally separate stories, right? Well, that's a duplicate. Okay, and then, so let's go back to the lunch example that we talked about in talking about the 1AC story, right? So the 1AC story is something like, okay, we're all hungry, we don't have any lunch, that's uniqueness. The plan is to go get lunch somewhere like Taco Bell or whatever. And then the impact is we won't be hungry anymore, we'll feel better, we can study better, et cetera, right? So what would be a disadvantage to that plan? Here's one potential disadvantage. An unforeseen outcome is that you could get in a car accident, right? If you go out to lunch somewhere, if you drive there, even if you don't drive, if you bike or something, you have the potential to be in a car accident, get hit by a car, right? So if we don't go to lunch somewhere, then you don't need to drive. So here's the story, right? If you don't go to lunch somewhere, you don't need to drive. Therefore, driving to lunch puts you at risk of being in a car accident. And a car accident could be a very harmful, even life-threatening event, right? So as the negative, if you're against the idea of going somewhere to lunch, against the 1AC's plan, you don't necessarily need to say that like Taco Bell is bad or like fast food is bad or it's unhealthy or whatever. You could say all that, or you could tell a completely different story, right? You could say, we don't need to go out to lunch because the risk of going out to lunch, the risks that that involves are much greater than the benefits we get from going out to lunch. Like you could be in a car accident or something like that, right? So this story is an unforeseen consequence of doing the affirmative, of doing the affirmative's plan of going out to lunch. So I hope this makes sense. If this doesn't make a lot of sense, don't worry about it. The next video is about the structure of a disad and how that structure tells a story in itself. So I think that'll help explain the story itself a lot more and how it relates to the 1AC. So if you don't get it, don't worry about it. We're going to spend more time talking about it. I hope you like this video though, and I hope it does make sense. But either way, you should probably watch the next video anyway. So I'll see you there.